So with that said, let's jump into some of the definitions of the different types of options. Now the first type of option is what I would call a sandwich lease option. And a sandwich lease option, think about a sandwich that you're in the middle. So here's what it is. It's two separate lease options, one between the seller and the investor, you, and the second between the investor and a tenant buyer. So kind of visualize yourself. You're in the middle. On one side is the seller, on the other side is the buyer. Obviously, what you're buying it for from the seller must be less than what you're selling it to the buyer for. Now, on a sandwich lease option, you're going to stay involved and stay in the middle, hence the sandwich. So we're going to talk about how do you make sure there's enough meat in the middle of a sandwich in order for you to want to stay involved in that deal. A cooperative lease option is a lease option between an investor and a seller which is sold to a tenant buyer for a fee. The investor is then out of the picture. Okay, so here's what happens. You find a seller wanting to do a lease with an option to buy, but instead of finding a tenant buyer and you staying in the middle, you're going to sell your deal that you created with the seller to a buyer for a fee, and you're going to step out. In the real estate investing world, we call that a wholesale. When you're selling, you're flipping your contract to another individual. So in other words, what you negotiated with the seller is beneficial enough for a buyer to pay you a fee in order to purchase that property from you. That's a cooperative lease option. So there's two different strategies here. If we look at them, the first one is that sandwich lease option. This one is, what I would call your big money strategy. In order to do a sandwich lease option, though, the seller must have equity in the property, meaning that they have to owe less than the property's worth. Why? Because in order for you to stay in the middle of the deal, there must be some way for you to get some or all of that equity. Otherwise, you might as well just flip it and do a cooperative lease option. Cooperative lease option is your quick money strategy. You're flipping that deal. You're wholesaling. You're finding a buyer, taking a fee, and you're out of the deal. Now, with a cooperative lease option, your seller doesn't have to have any equity, but they should not be upside down. So if you're taking notes, you really want to make sure you write this down. Do not do any lease option with a seller who owes more on the house than the house is worth. Why? Because that's called a short sale, where the bank will take less than what's owed on the property. Because the value has gone down. Now, this particular deal, we're talking about either sellers that do have equity or they pretty much owe what it's worth. Cooperative options work real well for that also. Or if the seller has equity, you certainly could do a cooperative also. If you just like to flip, take your fee and be out of the deal. Otherwise, you're going to want to do a sandwich lease option and stay in the middle of the deal. So again, a sandwich lease option is your big money strategy. Your cooperative is your quick money strategy. Both very good, profitable, and hey, they always put money in your pocket, so they're both great. Let's break these down and look at and analyze some numbers so that you can better understand exactly how these lease options work. Okay, let's look at a deal with the sandwich lease option. Now, these are just made up numbers to give you an example of how a deal would work. Let's say the seller is willing to option you a property for $100,000. It's optioned to a tenant buyer for more money, your tenant buyer, say for $119,900. So the difference between the two is $19,900. We'll call that the meat in the middle of our sandwich lease option, the difference between what you're buying it for and what you can sell it for. Now, obviously, the property has got to be worth a little bit more than $100,000. Probably $115,000 to $120,000 would be what this property is worth. In other words, real close to that $119,900 value. The rent paid to the seller is $700, and let's say you can receive $900 on this particular deal, which would give you $200 every month cash flow. Now you're already starting to see how profitable these deals can be. You don't even own this deal, and look what it can already generate for you. Cash flow every month and money in the back end of this deal, the $19,900. So let's break it down even more. So the difference again is $19,900. Now, 12 months times $200 a month is going to give you $2,400 a month cash flow. So assuming that these numbers are accurate and that the buyer exercises and buys from you in 12 months, 12 months times 200 would give you $2,400 cash flow. Now, if they go 2 years, that'd be $4,800. 200 times 24 months. But I'm just going to use an simple example. This is totally an example for you to show you how sandwich lease options should work and can work for you. So the total profit on this deal is $22,300. How many of you could use an extra 22 grand this year? I'm sure we all could, couldn't we?